This is Vertigo 2, the sequel to Vertigo, remastered, where once again you're trying to escape the quantum reactor to get home, but with danger lurking around every corner, you'll have to arm up and fight your way through hordes of robots and aliens. This releases January 15th, 2024 for the PSVR 2 headset for roughly $30 US, and is also available on PCVR headsets through Steam. I reviewed this a few months back, so let's see if this port delivers on all the awesome that the PC version gave us. Hello VR fanatics! Before we get to it, if you enjoy our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment with your thoughts on this release or the current state of the PSVR 2 landscape. I'm Ryan for the VR Grid. Now let's do this. I'm assuming that more than a few PSVR 2 owners may have missed out on the first Vertigo game, available on Steam via a remastered version, which is a shame as it's an indie gem. So, to quickly catch you up, you played as Sonya, a human trying to escape an alien reactor whom, at the game's grand finale, is sent plummeting back down to the facility's depths. That backstory is briefly touched on at Vertigo 2's onset, but it's almost irrelevant as you're essentially doing the same thing in the sequel, only on a much larger scale. Story aside, it's unfortunate that the first game isn't available to PSVR 2 users, as there are more than a few references to the first game that will just go over people's heads, but these are inconsequential to the story, which is both epic and action-packed. Standard FPS controls are in effect here, with weapons and items being stored on either hand, the former of which can be accessed by turning your offhand over, displaying your holographic inventory, while the latter can be summoned using a weapon wheel. Ammo is infinite for any weapon you pick up, though the more powerful the gun, the longer it takes for that ammo to respawn at your waist. Weapon upgrade suitcases are hidden throughout the campaign, which can add additional ammo, scopes, increased damage, and a few more perks to help out, especially when you face the bigger bad guys. It's a system I came to enjoy, as the game forced me to switch up weapons I was using during larger encounters, and never let me solely rely on my favorite guns. If not using full locomotion, you can also teleport, which will be needed for some of the platforming sections, and the longer you hold the teleport button, your thumbstick, the further you'll travel, and while I typically don't enjoy teleportation, even when it's used as a gaming element, in Vertigo it's much needed as some enemies can run you down quick and deliver massive damage, so if you don't get out of the way, you could be dead in seconds. To avoid that outcome, health injectors can be found throughout the game, as can health stations, which require you to take the injector and plug it into your chest to restore your health as indicated on your smartwatch. As teleportation is linked to your offhand thumbstick, I did find myself on occasion accidentally teleporting, which can be confusing as I often did this during battles, leaving me to quickly try and find my bearings. Not the end of the world, but it did cause an unfortunate death or two, though thankfully the autosave system always had me restarting at whichever encounter I had died upon, and if the game is ever too easy or too challenging, the difficulty can be changed on the fly, which is an option I really appreciated during some of the harder encounters. The only other issue with the controls that I had is that the duck button is mapped to your main hand thumbstick being aimed downward, and is just too sensitive, and I often found myself ducking when I meant to just turn. This was just more annoying than anything else, but it did occur quite a bit during my time in the game. Encounters can be harrowing as enemies of all shapes and sizes attack you in various ways, with each one always keeping you on your toes. There are slower moving zombie-like aliens with hands for heads that shamble towards you, or robots of various sizes that try and pick you off with their various weapons. Floating eyeball creatures continuously vomit black orbs at your face, while vicious dinosaur-like creatures appear out of thin air and charge at you with reckless abandon. It's important to learn each enemy's strengths and weaknesses, and as you run into each new foe, their bio is added to an encyclopedia you can reference anytime. Each stage seems to introduce a new enemy type or two, and while some can be a little more mindless than others, they can come in such high numbers that getting overwhelmed can be all too easy. There are also various environmental puzzles to solve, with some being as simple as finding a needed item, like a hard hat, to bypass a barrier, while others will have you using cranes to move containers, or nearby consoles and holograms to gain access to new areas. Throw in some very epic and sometimes funny boss battles, and you get an action-packed sci-fi title that should make anyone looking for a fleshed-out campaign quite happy, as all of these elements come together to make this game feel very much like Half-Life, and while the first game came off as more of a light version of that lauded franchise, Vertigo 2's grandiose scale makes it feel much more in line with what we expect from the Half-Life series. So much so in fact that the developer has called this game Half-Like, although this one takes itself way less seriously and injects tons of sarcastic humor throughout the 10 to 12 hour story. While everything in here is fairly refined, it did take me a few stages before I fell into the game's groove, with the first few opening levels being very disorienting thanks to the pace at which things happen. It wasn't until just before the halfway mark where plot points began to fall into place a little more clearly, and motivations were revealed, so if the story doesn't grab you right away, don't worry, it will. The difficulty does spike quickly, and more than a few moments had me feeling very overwhelmed, but once I began to exploit enemy weaknesses, learned where my weapons were best used, and played with a bit more caution, I began to once again feel like a badass, dispatching every weird creature that got in my way. I did suffer a few glitches throughout my play that forced me to either reload my last save, or figure out a solution on my own, which included one of the characters, Brian, disappearing into the ceiling as an elevator lowered, and the only solution that worked was to shoot him as he started to lift off the ground. Another incident wouldn't let me select any other weapon until that encounter was over. Enemies sometimes got caught up in geometry, or my arms might have as well, but those issues were never game breaking and infrequent, so once I moved past the problem, I soon forgot about it in favor of what I was going to experience next. Vertigo 2's presentation is fantastic, though for those expecting Alex levels of visuals, I would temper those expectations as what's here can look much more cartoonish at times, and honestly felt more in line with the older Half-Life games. That's not to say it looks bad, far from it, as outside of a few character models, everything in here looks great, especially when you factor in the scope and variety in the stage design. You'll start off in a complex, escape on a helicopter-type vehicle while cruising through mountainsides before visiting more areas of the quantum reactor, and plenty more alien settings that sometimes feel ripped right from movies, but never once do these areas feel like knockoffs, but homages that still carry unique flair. Dynamic lighting effects are top-notch, with reflections all looking pristine, and while some surfaces may have a lower texture quality when viewed up close, for the most part, this exudes a thoughtful care as even when walking through seemingly stock corridors, the addition of comedic signage or stumbling across some nutty scenarios just gives Vertigo 2 a ton of personality, and from beginning to end, I was looking forward to what I was going to see next, as it was always something I'd never seen before in any game, well, outside of the first one I guess. I also appreciated the cutscenes, which are cinematically boxed in as if you're reviewing a flat video, but are still rendered in 3D, thus keeping immersion at the forefront of the storytelling. Vertigo 2 really does highlight the power of consoles and PCs alike, showcasing that with some huge draw distances, wonderfully rendered environments, and an attention to detail that we will hopefully be seeing more of now that AAA VR experiences are back in demand. Where there's excellent presentation, there's typically awesome sound design, and Vertigo 2 delivers on that front with an engaging soundtrack that makes almost every moment in this bizarre world feel undeniably epic. There will be moments where you may be wandering in silence, exploring caverns, recycling plants, alien landscapes, and many more locales, but when the music kicks in, I knew I was in for a fight or something totally unexpected, as the very 80s synth sci-fi soundtrack is a genre I really dig. Spatial audio is also flawless, with the slightest sound in any direction alerting me to foes who may be trying to sneak up on me. Performances are also, for the most part, great, though some of the characters can come off as a little wooden or even hard to understand, and I had to listen very carefully during the cutscenes to try and piece together what some of them were saying. Once again, nothing game-breaking here, and the voice work does fit the surrealness of it all. It can just be a little underwhelming or confusing at times, which is counter to all the comedy happening, and while it's not Trover Saves Universe levels of non-stop jokes, when the funny stuff pops up, I almost always laughed out loud. PSVR 2's haptics are in use, though do feel a little underutilized. Like everything is turned up to a 7 in the controllers, at the most, so while every gun feels slightly different while being shot, none quite have the punch that we've seen in games like Tales from Galaxy's Edge. Whenever I took damage, my headset vibrated, which I always appreciate in an action-packed title where projectiles are constantly flying in my way. In this current age of the PSVR 2, and to look toward more premium VR titles, Vertigo 2 is unique, as almost no recent campaign-based VR shooter matches its scope in regard to not just visuals, but variety and gameplay. What's here just feels like a giant breath of fresh air thanks to some incredibly refined gunplay, plenty of secrets to find, a bizarre epic story, and humorous charm that never overstays its welcome, while still delivering some intense action. PSVR 2 players should rejoice, as this really is one of the best uses of the medium released in the last few years. I'm going to give Vertigo 2 for the PSVR 2 an 8.5 out of 10. It's weird, action-packed, and awesome. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to do all the YouTube things to help us out. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.